Ja,
Well, good evening and welcome to the Heinrich-Böll-Foundation, to the book presentation and discussion Colonial Past, Postcolonial Future, Rethinking German-Namibian Relations. You, dear guests in this room who have come here in large numbers, and also those who have joined us via the live stream. And I would like to extend a particular welcome to you, to our guests from Namibia, from Sweden and Norway, who have taken a long trip to be here and join in-person meetings in Berlin. So thank you very much for making the effort and for coming here in large numbers. We have, for too much time, been connected in the digital realm, and to be together again once in person is great. So it's great that you're here. Raquel, Naita, Wasaha, Henning, Kristin, and Uwe. My name is Kirsten Krampe. Thank you very much. My name is Kirsten Krampe, and I am the head of the Africa department at the Heinrich-Böll-Foundation. Tonight we will have two languages, German and English, and there is a simultaneous interpretation. To listen to the interpretation, you have to get a headset. If you need one, just go outside at the entrance. There's respective equipment, and we have great interpreters with us tonight. After our discussion, we will have a discussion with you here in the room, a Q&A, and the book that we will talk about, and also other books that we will also talk about, can also be bought afterwards. The book from Henning, Melber and Kristin Platt, and also the guests that are here, also from Uwe Timm, who is here with us today, and also other authors, can be bought at the great bookshop Intercontinental outside of this room. Brennison Apsel is the publishing house. I would like to thank you for your support and for coming here. The German-Namibian relations, from a governmental point of view, hit the headlines in last May, when after several years a declaration, which is usually called reconciliation agreement, was agreed upon between the two states, Germany and Namibia. And the declaration recognizes the genocide, and the gesture of a recognition has ever since been discussed in a controversial way. And the relations between Germany and Namibia seems to be stalled to a certain extent instead of revitalized. In this context, the book by Henning, Melber and Kristin Platt describes the complex relationships. Persons from civil society, politics of both states are having a say in this book, and they look at the colonial past, and it's an attempt to come to terms with the colonial past and look for a future relationship, a relationship that is often dubbed special relationship by Germany. And now we would like to focus on the quest for a new relationship tonight. And I'm quite happy to be able to talk to Henning, Melber and Kristin Platt at the beginning. And I would like to ask you to join me on the podium. And while you do so, I will briefly introduce you. Kristin Platt, who has come here to my left, is the head of the Institute for Diaspora and Genocide Research at the Ruhr University in Bochum, and also a private lecturer at the Institute for Cultural Studies at the Humboldt University in Berlin. And Henning Melber, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think you've lived in Namibia from the age of 17 on. He's the head of the Policy Research Institute in Windhoek, and later on also the research director at the Nordic Africa Institute in Uppsala, and also the director of the Kasinga Massacre Foundation. So welcome to both of you. And I'm quite happy that I can now talk about your book. I already mentioned the reconciliation agreement in my introductory remarks, and this was actually the starting point of your book, but by no means it's the content of your book. In your introduction, I could read that this insecurity that might evolve out of such a process should be given more room. So you allow much more room for this insecurity in your book. So why do we need this insecurity? So whoever would like to answer. Well, we continue to live in asymmetric power relations. And from this perspective of a dominant society, we often hear of this partnership at an eye level or at a level playing field. However, it's not really existent. I mean, if you take it seriously, when you deal with such a past, with discrimination, with murder and dehumanization, then of course the starting point needs to be insecurity, because it falls back on us. We have to question what kind of system have we been socialized, and what kind of values are we transferring, and how can we correct some ills. And of course we have to doubt things, and of course this includes that we hurt people, and this leads to insecurity, and this needs to be the starting point when we try to approach each other and when we want to take this reconciliation seriously, even though this does not yet bring about reconciliation, but this is the starting point of a painful process that we have to embark upon. And also an open process, yes, exactly. So this is also part of this term, insecurity. And, well, we have talked much about remembrance culture and memory culture. And what you bring up in your book time and again is remembering for the future. And what do you connect with it? So what does this include, remembering for the future? Well, first of all, it's a future that needs to be mentioned in the plural form. It's futures. And this is also a message of this book, and not only of the idea for the book, but also the individual contributions. We want to make clear that we cannot foresee the final stage of remembering. I mean, remembering or memories are usually something that belongs to the past. This has something to do with generations, with a heavy backpack, which becomes less heavy when you deal with it. But remembering a genocide, this is not happening. It cannot become lighter backpack. And it's not only confined to the past. And very often it's not really clear, because remembering also involves losses. And to mention these losses, to talk about it, to reconstruct family stories, this is a process which does not have a fixed end, but an insecure end, an unknown end. And this is what we try to do in our book. We tried to break up this process, to open up this process, and to describe something that cannot be put down to one thing or one result. So in writing about different perspectives, you see that there are different memories, different events that people remember. And this is also very important that we show that. And a very important part is listening, of course, isn't it? To listen to the stories. Yes, exactly. And acknowledge it. And remembering always works if you have a status and a position that is being recognized. This is very important. From a declaration, from some defense, I cannot remember. So then a remembrance process is not possible. Kelly. Well, we have talked way too much, and this is why I'm very grateful that the Heinrich-Böll-Foundation is not only presenting the book, but has also managed to involve people from Namibia who will tell about their stories, and that we have to listen. We have to consider it a privilege, which is an obligation at the same time. This is why we, the two of us, will be very brief, because then the main persons of this evening will present their stories. Really, this is very something special that you will talk about your perspectives, and this is also part of the book and also other books. This is why I also mentioned that eventually we will talk about many books tonight, also about Morenga and the book of Urzawara. And you will later on, through my voice or yourself, read part of your book. And Kristin, in your contribution, and I just wanted to talk about one more difficult topic, and you just said, Henning, that it might be a difficult process if you want to deal with it openly in public. And you, Kristin, talked about the genocide and the German-Namibian remembrance process, that suffering needs to be talked about. And I think this is also one of the topics that people try to avoid. I mean, we talk about some things we talk about very often or a lot, but some topics are being avoided. So what do you mean by talking about this topic in more detail?
Well, first of all, the remembrance of genocide is never a question about a symbolical place. It's a question about a real place, a lost place in history, and how to reconstruct a family history. And then there are also a number of special moments where the colonial history and the national history of the West meet. And it's also a question of new determination. When we talk about the land, it's a place of survival, it's a place of families, and here colonial means a territory that is about taking land, grabbing land, redefining things. And when we talk about German colonialism, it's also an ideological question. And so a process of remembrance must acknowledge that and must tie memories to the places. And remembrance also concerns social relations. It's not just something symbolical, and the central issue is land. Land as defined nationally, and land in a modern definition is territory, is ownership, is also sharing. And we need also land and names for land in order to be able to describe a history of genocide. Would you like to say something about land? Yeah. Here, of course, we look at the German colonial history. And in spite of the contemporary German-Namibian relations, people still have looked at the colonial history as a kind of a footnote, but it's an actual topic in Namibia every day. The Namibian population, because of the unequal distribution of land and private ownership situations, are confronted with colonialism. For them, it's not a past, it's the present. And this already shows what the asymmetry of relations is all about. We here don't understand that. If we were Namibians, we would probably not understand why the Germans don't see what the situation is like. And that also means that, first of all, we have to understand that. We have to acknowledge that, confront that situation, and then start working on it. The agreement is called Reconciliation Agreement, and it says, word by word, the German government bows deeply to the affected people and ask forgiveness. And then, in that agreement, it is being said that the Namibian government and the population of Namibia accept this apology. Who was ever asked in Namibia, are they willing to accept an apology as long as the land is still private property of the descendants of the German colonialists? They can even deny people access to the graves of their ancestors because they can say it's private land, you may not enter. So, indeed, this is something that was vividly criticized during the negotiation process. But let me ask my last question. Probably we are going to come back to what we are talking about at the moment. When we talk about the culture of remembrance, we do talk about that a lot. And how important is justice in this culture of remembrance? Don't we have to ask questions of how to guarantee justice when we talk about remembrance? Reconciliation has a price. If we are serious about wanting reconciliation, reconciliation is not only possible when we pay material compensation, but when we are serious, if we are serious about reconciliation, we have to acknowledge the injustice that was created. And acknowledging injustice means already the first step to undo that. What has happened in the so-called German Southwest Africa cannot be undone. But now we have to confront the situation. And this inequality that we still have, and land is the most prominent example of this injustice, we have to contribute to reducing that injustice as one form of recognition that injustice was inflicted on the people, and justice, in as far as it can be created, also means that we have to contribute materially. How can we do that as the German society, the German government? How can we do that? Everything that has to do with land is an internal Namibian affair. And the money that Germany offers will be spent by the Namibians themselves. That is just the superficial first step. But as a second step, we are currently discussing the question of what is the task of Europe? How must Europe face its colonial past? And that's not just a symbolical issue. It also concerns the political, social, historical structures in those former colonies. These former colonies have developed a new order, but we still see the repercussions of colonial structures, also changing of borders, changing of languages, changing of relations. And here we do not just have to think in terms of what governments can do. I mean, we have 195 national states and many more nationalities. And that is an issue we need to discuss also in the case of Namibia. We have to try and find ways not only to talk between the governments, we have to give groups a status in the political process, in the process of remembrance. And that would be one way to try and create justice. This cannot be done quickly. Here we need generations. And we really have to give an opportunity to the groups to be involved. That's a major challenge, not just giving quick answers, functional answers, and go on from there, but we rather have to see that it is about self-determination, a changing of the structures of the current order. And so we have to open the political space to groups, and that's a very important task, a very important challenge. This is what we'd like to address later. during that evening. We'd like to just come back to that when we open the discussion to our audience here. But now, first of all, I'm very happy to invite on stage new people. The current panelists are going to take a seat, and I would like to ask Raquel, Naita, Uzovaro, and Uwe to come on stage. Now I can sit down. I was nervous in the beginning. Now when I sit down, I will be more quiet. And while I take a seat, I'd like to introduce our next panelist that I've just invited to come on stage. Raquel Andreas is a social scientist.
Oops, great, well done, thank you. Thanks for joining.
Raquel Andreas, sitting at my right, is a social scientist, and she lives and works in Duisburg and in Windhoek, Namibia. For some time, she was a research associate for the Institute for Public Policy Research, and she is a social policy commentator and being very committed to human rights and nation building. Naita Hishuno, as we are going to talk about, grew up on Schloss Berlin, a castle near Berlin. In 1990, she was deported to her home country. She now lives in Windhoek, works at the Institute for Democracy, and she's also in charge of political initiatives in Namibia and the south of Africa. Uzovaro Ewald Kapombo Kachivena, to my further left, was born in Otjiwarongo, was a member of the executive committee of SWAPO, went into exile in '64. Then he studied in West Berlin, became a filmmaker, continued to study in Norway, returned to Namibia after independence, and helped build up the State Broadcasting Corporation of Namibia. He's also an author, has written many books, and today he's retired and lives with his wife in Arendal in Norway. Uwe Timm, and I think there's no need to really introduce you to Berliners. He is one of the most well-known contemporary writers in Germany. Essays, and in 1978 he wrote and published Morenga, a post-colonial historical novel about the uprising against the German occupiers in Namibia. He lives in Munich, and welcome to you as well. I am now going. Welcome to everybody once more. I am now going to switch English. Raquel has studied in Duisburg and Essen. Her German is wonderful. She understands everything, but we have decided to have our conversation in English.
A question, because in the contribution, by the way, is translation working for everybody? Are you all interpretation? Yeah, I try to speak slowly. If it's too fast, you just give me signs, then we slow down. Raquel, you write in your book, in this book, in your contribution, that interesting for me that the first time you heard about the genocide was in high school, and only later when you start the way it was taught in high school. And I'm surprised that you have to reach that age to hear about it. And I'm wondering how much knowledge is there about the genocide? How much was there? Has it changed? Is there more talk? Is it part of the curriculum now? And who concerned and whom doesn't? In us.
All right. Am I on now?
Hmm?
All right. So basically, the Namibian history that we grew up with was pretty much focused on the liberation struggle, especially considering the fact that my generation, without telling everybody my age, is that of the post-independence era. So when Berlin was celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall, in Namibia we're celebrating that we're finally independent. So the memory culture that was curated after independence, a lot of emphasis was placed on the liberation struggle and gaining independence, to the point that the issue of the genocide, the Vaherero and Nama genocide, took a back burner. And so going through high school and studying history, there was a lot of focus on the liberation struggle, and then later on you're in university and you unpack this genocide narrative and you realize that, but why was it not as detailed in my history textbooks when I was in high school? Because at the moment, I even remember thinking back then when I was in high school that I need to find my way into Germany one day, because the Germany that I read about in high school was this great nation that during the scramble of Africa was able to get Namibia, Southwest Africa at the time. And unfortunately, because of what happened with World War II, they had to give it up. Oh, wow, what a sad story, right? And then you get to university and you're thinking, okay, that's not what I've been believing. All through high school, it was actually more intense than that. It was not a good story. But then at that time, when I was going through high school, I remember thinking, I have to find my way to Germany one day, because I just thought it was this great Western power. I think in a nutshell, that's how I can frame it. And then on your question as to, has it changed? Today, I want to believe that because of the awareness that has been raised over the years on the genocide issue, it's looking very different to a large extent. I think the generation after me is very much aware of the fact that it was not a heroic story. And matter of fact, the fact that to date, people are living this experience, it's a lived reality. It was not a heroic story, it's a story that needs to the best of its ability, find a common ground for the sake of future relations between our two countries. So I can say that it's a bit different, but it's because of awareness raising efforts, it's because of dialoguing, like what's happening today.
How about Namibia in itself, even without the relations? Is remembering what happened a way of nation building? Is it needed for nation building?
It is needed for nation building because the unfortunate reality is, in as much as we talk about the history being quite skewed, in as much as we talk about the fact that for Germany, for example, there's an effort to try and move towards reconciliation past, sort of looking at it like it's the past. But like for Namibia, it's a lived reality. But the challenge in Namibia right now is Namibia's memory culture is framed around what is put on the national stage for remembrance. To date, we still don't have a national holiday recognized for this genocide issue. And that in itself also shows to the reality that in our own country, we're still struggling with just creating a common culture. But contrasting to that, the day that I flew out here was actually a public holiday in Namibia. And it's a public holiday called Heroes Day. And the heroes that are being remembered are the heroes of the liberation struggle. But before the liberation struggle, there was another struggle. And it's the struggle that out of it came the genocide issue. But we still do not have a national holiday recognizing that. Matter of fact, it's the affected communities themselves that organize themselves and have their own commemorations. Now, I'm sitting here dressed in a Nama dress. I am not from the Nama-speaking community. I'm an Oshivambo speaker. And that's why bringing it into sort of the contribution that I added to the book, I felt as a Namibian that it's important to approach this issue with empathy. I might not be from the affected communities, but I'm aware, even within my country, of the fact that the conversation is very skewed, the memory culture is very skewed, and unfortunately, these weaknesses that we show to the world are visible for all to see. So I felt it's important, and I still do feel that it's very important that as a young Namibian who is not necessarily directly affected by the genocide issue, I need to also make sure that I add my voice to the affected communities. And one of the ways to go about it is sit at platforms like this and really engage the issue. So with emotional intelligence, the onus is really on Namibians that are not directly affected by the genocide to join hands with the affected communities by empathizing, respecting what they are going through, and also really framing it in the context of, look, if we do not address this issue as a nation, this could be a ticking bomb for Namibia. Because Namibia is an ethnically heterogeneous country, and as long as people continue to be frustrated, they feel that their voices are not being heard, they feel that they are not able to move on, because like as it was shared before, for the Ovaherero and Nama communities, this is not the past. You go to Windhoek, the street names are there in German. You go to Swakopmund, the buildings are there, you know, little Bavaria, they call it. The establishments are there where you cannot even enter as a Namibian because, you know, priority is given to German-Namibians, for example. The land is there. The land question is still unanswered. The fact that you can walk by a farm and say, this is my ancestors' land, but I don't have the right of entry. This is a lived reality for them. And woe is me as a Namibian to be ignorant to this reality, because if we are talking about the nation building project, we need to be able to bring these different realities together and find common ground. And one of the best ways to do it is really to be emotionally intelligent about it. Not to appropriate it. I can appropriate a dress, but I cannot appropriate their lived experiences. But what I can do is add my voice to it and try and heighten it and say that, look, this is the reality and it's very emotional. We are living with people who you are walking in the street and the person cannot explain why it is that they are fair in complexion and they have green eyes. But then when you trace it back, it's because an ancestor was raped. And now, are they German-Namibians or are they Ovaherero? Or are they Nama? There's also now the issue of identity politics that also creeps in. So it's quite a loaded issue. And I submit that we need to be emotionally intelligent when we approach this issue.
Very loaded, very complex in your own processes. Thanks for sharing. I should say in the beginning that I'm not, there will be no justice to any of my panelists here, unless we spend the whole night together. So we leave this as an introduction. I think emotional intelligence you introduce as a very, almost like a practical tool. And I think for us in Germany, there's a lot to take from there. Thank you for sharing. Wazavaru, I know you're there. It's good you're here. Actually, your contribution to the book we're talking about tonight is very much based on your own book. And unlike Raquel, who just said, I'm not from a descendant, you are. And you wrote a book about your grandmother. Jahohora, who was called Mama Pene, and the book is called Mama Pene. It was published in 2020 in Namibia. And in the contribution that you gave to Henning and Kristin for this collection of articles, you say, when you were grandchildren, actually your grandmother raised you, right? Is that right? You will say something about it. So while your grandmother was raising you, you as grandchildren went to her and you said, tell us the story about your parents. Can you share the story with us tonight? I would love you to speak into a microphone. And also as Avaro, he speaks brilliantly German. But I think we stay in English for a bit, because in Norway you don't practice that much. I think it's working. I think it already works if you just speak in. Guck mal. Oh, Naita macht das.
Ich brauche Hilfe.
Naita is our new technician here on the panel.
Is it functioning?
Yes.
I don't even want to try to speak in German because since 1940, 84. I have never spoken German really, and I mix it with the Norwegian, so it becomes a complete confusion. I always talk about my grandmother because this is a woman who raised us. And she has experienced the terrible thing observing her parents and her grandparents being shot down. And she was only lucky because she had left the house very early and she went into the forest, and when she was just coming back, she saw her parents being shot. And she survived. She was 11 years old, and she survived by herself. And she told us a history of how she survived, how she met some German, because after the grandparents were shot, she wanted to go and be shot also because she thought she has no possibility to live. But she remembers something that her mother said, and her mother said, it's our grandmother, and she said, "My daughter, you are born to live. And if you have any chance to live, you must always accept that life which God gave you." And when she remembered that, she decided that she is not going to deliver herself. She is going. And when she turned, there was a German young man who was relieving himself, and when he saw her, he just waved her away with his cap. And she knew that, okay, she had to leave, and she walked away.
There was one of the German soldiers.
Yes.
Amongst the
and
soldiers
then was
that
a
shot
German
her parents.
soldier who was a postman, was riding a horse with a post. He saw her. He came up from the horse, take the sword, and came to her. And she was not afraid at all. And he looked at her, and then he put the sword back, came down from the house, gave her water, this can with water, and he rode his horse and rode away. Now, my grandmother said that she was not thankful for that because this man was only trying to show her that he has a life, he has a right to her life, to give her life or to take her life. So it was not out of goodness that he did it, but it's out of his pride that he can show her he is something bigger. And I would have liked you, Madam Chairman, to read a piece in German from my book, and you can read it as short as you can or as long as you can.
I'll gladly do so. I was trying to get Uwe Zavaro to read himself tonight, but he insisted that it should come to. But I ask you one more question before I read, if you agree.
Always.
It's okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because what struck me when I read your contribution in the book here is that you recall that your grandmother, you urged her, tell us the story. So she told you the story that you now just shared with us, a very painful one. And she said to you, and you write this down, that she requested from you, she sat down with you to tell you, but she requested you to never forget your origins, from which you come, and always commemorate your origins. And I was wondering, was your final sitting down, writing this book about your grandmother, is this obeying to her request? Are you there for remembering where you come from?
You know, my grandmother came from a family that was in fact helping other families in the village when they had a conflict. We have a special word in Ocherero, I can't even repeat it, but their job was to make sure that when there is a conflict, it can be solved. Sometimes she was even joking with us and say that, when people are in conflict, there is always leaders who are leading them. how do we make it that there should be no war? And she said, the only thing that we can stop war is to take those two leaders, opposing leaders, lock them up in one house. They should never get out of this house until they found peace. And she said, I can assure you, in a week's time, they will find peace. Now, we were laughing about it. We found it very funny, but I found it very serious, really. And my grandmother was also very funny. She used to tell us that what peace means. And peace is like, she says, like something that always grow. It just doesn't, peace is not static. Peace is something that moves all the time. It always means to generate and create new situations all the time. But as long as you are wanting to have war, you will never know peace. It doesn't matter how much you say that no war is going to bring peace, the war will never bring peace. And we know it, but we ignore the whole reality that we know. That was the thing that I learned from my grandmother. And the reason why I want to reach this is that because I experienced this discrimination right in my own country. I have given an example of that Princess Ruprecht house in Namibia, in Swakopmund, where we were supposed to stay, me and my Norwegian wife and my two children. And I sent a letter applying for a place to stay. I got an immediate answer, the place is full. Then I asked my wife to write the same letter in with her name, and immediately they were placed for us to stay. Now, I'm being discriminated in my own country. I'm trying to talk about peace and negotiate and try to see whether I can get something back from what has been taken from me. And what do I get? I get just arrogance. Arrogance from the Germans, whether it is in Germany here or whether it is in Namibia. The children of the German people who killed me, they still discriminate me. I was working for Bosch for 2 years, and then I was told that he is going to give me a scholarship in Stuttgart. And he invited me to his house. But when I came, I was supposed to have dinner together. But when we came, he put me on the balcony with a door in between, and they sit inside and we're supposed to talk through this door. And I refused. I said that attitude already it's not even sympathetic for me to go to accept that way to Stuttgart. Now, these are the kind of things that I say that I have a German word, but you can, if you want, you can read it. If you don't want, it's a question of time.
I will, absolutely. I remembered when we talked yesterday that you said your grandmother that actually, and we will see in what I'm going to read, not only lost her parents and her grandparents, the cold-blooded murder by German soldiers, but was also very much discriminated. And yet, I remember you told me yesterday she always taught you not to hate the Germans. So I'm reading, if you allow.
Yes, you're happy.
I'm reading this in German. This is what you wanted, so I obey. Demütigung am Arbeitsplatz. Noch sagen.
Well,
So Jahohora, she escapes. Zawara was telling us how. I mean, she was twice almost also, her life was taken. Miraculously, she survives. And she walks away, and she walks for days to get to a safe place. You have to help me pronounce it. Korichas? Where she takes refuge then. And as you know, it was the time that you could be picked up by any soldier and put to a camp, murdered, everything. So she finds refuge at her uncle's house, who not too much later passes away, and then she's on her own, so she needs to go and work on a farm. And working on a German farm was life-saving at the time. You can maybe later in the Q&A and discussion maybe explain more. So here's how Mama Pene Jahohora enters her first workplace at a German farm. In German. Demütigung.
Humiliation at work. Under the colonial administration, people were forced to work wherever the German military or the administration wanted. Jahohora was no exception, and she was taken to a German farm to work. She never forgot the great humiliation that she experienced the very first day. She was unceremoniously dumped at a farm without any instructions as to where she should go or whom she should talk to. A man in a military truck drove her there and then just turned and drove away. She stood there in the sun for a while and then found a tree and sat down in the shade. She told her grandchildren about the experience. I was still wearing the remains of the traditional leather attire I had used through all those years. I was destitute. The most precious thing was the ceremonial headgear, which I had received from my parents, even though I was not considered mature enough. Then a woman called Katrina came to me. She originated from the Cape and served as a translator. She spoke more than 4 languages. Her main work at the farm was the running of the kitchen, cleaning the house and looking after the children. She came to me and told me that Frau Kirschner wanted to see me. I followed her to the big house where the German woman was standing at the entrance to the veranda. Frau Kirschner waved Katrina away and started to walk slowly towards me. Her eyes didn't waver as they stared into mine. She was taller and bigger than me, taller but not fat. She came so close to me that I had to look up to hold her stare. For a moment, she looked so hostile that I thought she was going to hit me, but nothing happened. I was about to smile, but I knew that would only provoke her, so I forced myself to stay calm while meeting her eyes without wavering. I could see that now she was close to tears, and I felt sorry for her. When she abruptly turned around and walked away with quick, short steps, I was left standing there wondering what really had just happened. I felt as if we had been fighting for something, but I had no idea what that was about. She had walked away as if she had lost the fight, but why? Later toward the evening, the man who brought me in the military truck returned. I was again called to the big house. The man was sitting in a chair on the veranda, and Katrina, who fetched me, was asked to translate for me. He had something very important to say to me and to give me some advice. He said the following: "You were disrespectful to my wife, and I warn you never to be disrespectful to her again. You do what she says, and you do so quickly as she wants you to do it. Your job is to do all the washing and clean the yard, and you will be taught how to wash and iron the clothes. Other tasks you have to do, my wife will instruct you. Now listen carefully. Right now I'm using words to explain how you are to behave. The next time I hear that you have misbehaved, you will get a thorough beating with this." He took a cane and hit the air with it to show what would happen to me. Then he said, "If I ever hear again that you have disobeyed her or behaved insolently, then I will have to separate your head from your body." He used a sweeping motion of his hand as if he was cutting his throat with a knife. I automatically put both hands around my neck, and he said that I had understood the message because I would never find my neck when he was finished with me. He leaned back a little in his chair before continuing. "Those skins you cover yourself with will never be allowed to enter this house, nor do I want to see you wearing them again. Understand?" I nodded. I was dismissed. When I went to bed that night, I puzzled over how I had been disobedient towards his wife. We did not speak to each other. We just stared at each other. I hadn't even started to work for her, so how I could have been disobedient was a mystery to me. At dawn the next day, I was ordered to the main house. The German woman had heated water in a big iron cauldron. The warm water was then poured into a metal tub, and with a pair of scissors, the woman cut all the clothes off my body and ordered me to wash myself in the soapy warm water. We had no common language, but her body language was easy to understand. Not a single word was uttered. We could have used our hands, mimicry, and science to try to understand each other, but I knew that saying something might be used against me as disobeying her. Jahora was forced to take off her headgear, which traditionally would have been removed only in a ceremonial act, officiated by her parents or appointed relatives. She mourned her tragedy in silence as the German woman also cut her headgear into pieces and put all the pieces in the fire. She did not cry, but she felt horribly humiliated. The headgear was the last visible connection with her parents. She was devastated by it being destroyed in such a brutal manner. After she had washed herself thoroughly, Jahora was commanded to stand naked in the sun until she was dry. She was shamed by this, but it was far less a humiliation than being robbed of her headgear. When she was dry enough, she was dressed in a German Victorian-style dress that made her move clumsily. She felt uncomfortable and very hot, but she soon adapted, as had the other Ovaherero woman on the farm. This was the beginning of a new phase in her life. Thank you very much.
I would say this, yeah, we can say it now also. Das Buch, ich habe es auch dabei und kann es Ihnen schon mal zeigen, ist in Namibia, wie gesagt.
Well, the book came out in Namibia, Mama Penny, Transcending the Genocide. And currently, this book is being translated, and you get lots of questions from the translator. It is going to be published in German in Namibia. If we have a publisher here in the room tonight, contact us after the event. It would be wonderful to have this book coming out in Germany too. I'd like to thank you very much for the story, although it is a very painful story, a story of humiliation. I'm very grateful that you told this story in this book and that you're talking to us about it tonight. Naita, it's also a serious topic I'd like to discuss with you. I wanted you to tell us something. I already said that you came as a child to Germany. You grew up in a boarding house. Why did you come here? There were political reasons. And why all of a sudden you had to go back to Namibia? Thank you, Kristin. It always has something to do with Namibia's history, and in particular, it has to do with the Cold War. When the Germans had lost the Namibian colony after the First World War, the Namibia became a mandatory of South Africa. South Africa then managed Namibia as a fifth province, and then apartheid started, and the National Party of South Africa came to power. It was then in 1966 when SWAPO started the armed struggle against South Africa. More and more Namibians went abroad, went into exile. At that time, you went through Botswana if you wanted to escape. Then Angola became independent in 1975, and Namibians could go transit Angola to leave the country. My parents went to Angola as well, and that is why I was born in Huambo in Angola. 2 years after I was born, the Kasinga Massacre was orchestrated. The Kasinga Massacre was when the South African army persecuted the Namibian refugees, bombarded them, committed air raids against them, committed massacres. There was a camp with over 1,000 refugees, mainly young people, women, children. And South Africa wanted to show the Namibians, you have to stay in Namibia. You're not allowed to run away. Your human rights are worth nothing. And then that was the time of the Cold War, and Angola got the support of Cuba and the Soviet Union. SWAPO approached the international community and asked for help, asked the international community to give asylum to children, sick people. GDR, the German Democratic Republic at the time, had decided to take up children, all the children that were sick. I was not in Angola at the time, I was in Zambia. And some parents didn't believe that SWAPO leadership could really give safety to the children, and so they sent their children. And that is why 80 Namibian children came to GDR, to Schloss Berlin. Sorry, it's not right in the middle of Berlin, but it's near Güstrow, the north of Berlin. So close to the Baltic Sea coast. So it was called Schloss Berlin, Castle Berlin, but it was not in Berlin. So I was 3 years old when I came to GDR. It was winter, 18th December 1979. And one of the first things you do is touch the snow, because we thought it was sugar. We were 80 Namibian children. We were subdivided into 6 groups. I was in group 1, 12 children, 7 boys, 5 girls. We had educators that took care of us, 3 German educators and 1 Namibian educator who were with us all the time, 24/7. So the Namibian educator was in charge of teaching us Namibian history, our own language, and keeping our ties with our country. And so the reason for me to grow up in GDR was a political one. I grew up, I went to school in East Germany, in GDR. I was there until 1990. In summer 1990, I would have entered 8th grade, and we were, of course, ideologically influenced in the meaning of communism and the liberation struggle. We always knew we are the children that will liberate and build up Namibia one day. We are going to go back to Namibia one day. But that was theoretical knowledge. We had our roll calls, we had our paramilitary training, we were in summer camps. And so we grew up in a bubble in a way. Many GDR citizens later on said, why did we never see you? And we said, well, we were always in our hostel. We were always just amongst ourselves, just together as a group. Even in the summer camps in Prero, in Falkensee, we were always together as a Namibian group. And we were always told, you don't say you're from Namibia, you say you're from Angola, because there was a lot of paranoia during the Cold War, East against West, North against South, and it was always difficult to give information. And that is why people in GDR didn't really notice us. Only when we came to Berlin to celebrate a youth festival or the Festival of Peace, so to say, when we attended political events in Berlin, then we were visible. And then you said you were a young girl, 8th grade, and what happened then? You had to leave the country. I remember when I was 12, I thought one day, oh my God, I don't want to have this war. I don't want to go to a country where there's a war and all these roll calls are boring. So when you're 12, 13, you become aware and you become conscious of what's happening around you. And I noticed at that time I don't want to be part of that history, of that story. And 1 year later, the wall came down. And so I was happy about it, because I said, I don't want to be in a war. I don't want to die. I don't want to shoot at people. I want to stay in GDR. I want to grow up, become a nurse or study. And so my feeling was, all right, what happens now? That is so important. Because ever since I was 3 until I was 12, I grew up in GDR with all that paranoia, where we were told that, of course, the West is bad. But we watched West German TV programs, and we went to Intershop, which was a shop inside GDR where you could only buy for foreign currency, convertible Western currency. And then the political changes happened. It was summer, July, more and more people leaving East Germany, going through Hungary, Czechia, Czechoslovakia at the time. And that was information we were hardly aware of because we were living in our bubble. But we noticed more and more people are going. And then some of our educators were gone, and we just heard they were part of Stasi. So it was a kind of snowball effect. The ball kept rolling and rolling. So that was the summer of 1989. More and more decisions were taken. You would see more and more things on television that new decisions were being taken in East Germany, like East Germany opened its borders. And I remember when East Germans went from the East to the West, got 100 Deutschmarks as a welcome money, and we thought, oh, right, we would get it too, but we didn't. Then I remember summer 1990, the first time the East and West German football teams played together and won the World Cup. That was the first united German football team. I was in Egypt, I don't remember. So that was contagious. We were enthusiastic. And so this united German football team that won, that was Klinsmann, Sommer. I still remember the names of them, of some of the players. And the newsreel, the East German newsreel, all of a sudden it was gone, and there was new news programs. And there was no longer the standard East German supermarkets, but the West German supermarkets were opened, and all the Western goods that we'd only seen on a TV screen were all of a sudden available. And when the all-German football team won the World Cup, we started noticing that people were singing the West German national anthem, and they hoisted the West German flag instead of the East German flag. People were interviewed about Germany and how it feels that Germany is a great nation again, having won the World Cup. And one man I remember said, Germany is great, we are a great nation again, and next thing we're going to get our colonies back. And I saw that, and I heard it, and I thought, oh my God, what does that mean? And that was a GDR citizen. It was not a West German. And so the first time I was confronted with that situation, we had learned about the colonies, but no, all of a sudden the Germans remember that. It was quite clear that Germany would be reunited soon. And that sentence stayed on my mind. That was still summer 1990. We went to Prero for one final time to spend our holidays. And when we came back from the holidays, we were told, you've got 2 weeks, pack your stuff, you're going back to Namibia. All of us were given 2 suitcases each. We had to pack all our life. I put my cuddly toys. I was 14, but I thought I would need my cuddly toys. And I had only summer clothes to put them in the second suitcase, where I thought, well, Namibia is a hot place to go to. Who of you has been to Namibia? You know how cold Namibia can be, especially now. When you have summer here in Europe, it's cold in Namibia. It can be quite cold, indeed. So we had 2 weeks to pack our whole life. A girl just used put hygiene articles into her suitcase. We wrote our diaries, see you at bush 7, palm number 6, or whatever. And all of a sudden, we were in Namibia and were confronted with a totally different reality. Let me come back to the book. You have written a very remarkable contribution to that anthology. Of course, it has something to do with your personal history, your experience. And so it was so nice to hear that from you. You said there is inequality in the relations between our countries, and that has something to do that there are things you cannot have, things that other people take for granted. It has something to do with citizenship, with visa, and so on and so forth. Can you explain? I'll try to be brief. I came back to Namibia. I've finished my school. Namibia had been a German colony. We still had German schools, and so I was in a German school. And of course, I understood now I'm in a German school. I can continue to speak German. And then I came back to Europe to study in Austria. And there, I really understood who I was. Until then, I've always thought I was German. And then I understood I can be both. I can be Namibian and German. I came back to Namibia, and my political awareness had grown. And I understood, well, the Germans in Namibia have a German passport and a Namibian one, so they can go to Germany anytime. If something goes wrong in Africa, they can always easily go back to Germany. Why can I not have the same? I grew up in Germany as well. I have part of my home in Germany. I'm part German. And so I went to Berlin to work at SFB at the broadcasting station. And I thought, okay, I can get a residence permit easily. I had been living in Germany for over 10 years. Spent 7 years in school here. I speak German. I am not dependent on the state. I study. I have my job. And the aliens office refused my application for a residence permit after 2 years, saying that I came here as a refugee, so I'm not entitled to get a residence permit. And so I thought, what do I do? Should I fight? Should I use legal means, or should I go? And I decided, they gave me 19 hours, and I decided, no, before having the police here taking me away to be deported, I'd go voluntarily. I went to England for a while, and I wondered, should I really fight for being given the right to come back? Why is that so important for me? And I thought, so what do I like about Germany? What do I dislike about Germany? And how about Namibia? And I understood that the unpleasant thing about Germany is I cannot face the unpleasant things in Germany. In Namibia, I can face also all the things that are not so pleasant, because they don't ask me all the time, who am I, why I'm here. I can get a flat. I'm not always questions, am I a fully valid human being? In Germany, I'm always asked, why am I here? What can I contribute to Germany? In Namibia, I can do so much more to create a more humane situation, and I can contribute to a more humane political education as well. But still, it gets on my nerves that I have no access. Every German Namibian that has German friends, they cannot see them, and the descendants of the Herero do not have the same access. Same goes for the descendants of the Namas. That is to say, the descendants of those women that were raped. And the question of citizenship, of course, you can have a Namibian citizenship, and Germany doesn't grant you the same rights, although you've been here. So there is inequality in that respect in respect of citizenship and residence permits. I mean, now, same, you had to carry that emotional burden. The Germans don't need a visa to travel to Namibia. And so the question really is, how about our relations in the future? Don't we need more mobility? We have asked the Foreign Office today. We have asked them about this process that we would need in order to have more freedom for Namibia and Namibians. And many people I talked to said it's a good idea. So we're going to continue our debate and our dialogue also with the Foreign Office, and NIDA is going to continue to support us. So before I now finish this conversation, let me turn to Uwe Timm. I'd like to invite him to also talk about his own CV, his own biography. Raquel said it was as late as high school that I heard about the genocide in Namibia. You have written in your contribution to the anthology, I think the mic is on, by the way. You heard about Namibia from your family. There was somebody in the civil defense unit. You have also written about the toppling of a monument. You're going to tell us what that situation was like when monuments on campus were being toppled, were being torn down. What did that mean to you, and how did you start being committed and active for Namibia?
Well, I grew up in the 1940s and 1950s, and at that time, the German colonial era was seen in a very rosy way. And this was also the way the media looked at it, not only in a few groups, but this was really mainstream, that the Germans were considered a civilizatory pioneers. They had built the railway, the hospitals. So they actually brought civilization to the colonies. So this was actually the predominant idea. And in my home, the strange thing was that my father was a member of the military, that old comrades came about. They were members of the so-called protective forces, and they talked about Africa. And this was a bit strange for me. I was always allowed to listen. It was a strange experience. So this was completely different from what I had experienced, where there's order, beating, bravery. And then they talked about Namas who did not beat up their children. This is what the officers told at the time as some kind of criticism. But this was really a strange mixture, but I was interested in it. And then I heard about ethnology, and I, in the 1966, 67, we had a university in Hamburg which was founded as a colonial higher education institution. I mean, there were all the shipbuilders who earned quite a lot with the war or during the war. And a former German governor from German Southwest Africa, he was called Wisman, his name was Wisman, and he was run over by the SDS, and they pointed to his past actions, what he had done in Namibia. And the Bild tabloid talked about a barbaric situation, that this was really against culture. And then the Wisman monument was put up again. and then it was torn down again. And then it disappeared. So this was an early starting point for me. I could see that there are so many colonial relics in our cities. There are so many streets named after colonial officers, Trota, who is rightly connected with this order to kill all the people or to make them flee into the desert. And so this politicization made me go to the SIS, and there I met people from the SWAPO or the ANC, and I got more closely in contact with this. I was also a member of the anti-apartheid movement, and with the colleagues there, I worked on a project, and I wrote Morenga, and this was completely out of the perspective of the Germans. I did not dare to readapt it. This is actually really the point of view of the colonizers, which is the Germans in this case. I would like to talk about the way of telling your story in more detail in a moment, but now I would like to ask you, how did Morenga come about? So you went to Namibia and did some research for 4 years, and then you also incorporated original documents in your novel. For example, letters of the German soldiers, and also insights into the deliberations of the military leadership of the Germans. And Morenga was published in 1978. You were actually called as someone who is writing negatively about your own country. And before coming to the way of narrating, I would like to know, how did this title Morenga come about? In the apartheid movement and also among the comrades from Namibia, the term Morenga was not known, and I stumbled upon Morenga when I was in the archive in Namibia and realized that it's very important. And also in the report of the German General Staff, because this Morenga, in contrast to the Herero, did not strive for a fight in the battlefield, but a guerrilla war. And he also had a theory. In South Africa, it was called Marengo. In Southwest and in German Southwest Africa, he was called Morenga. And there's also a diary that was lost that he wrote in German. And I found a few pages of this diary. It would also be highly interesting for Namibians if we could find this diary. So this Morenga appears, and he thinks beyond different ethnic groups. His mother was Herero, and he devised a concept which is basically an international concept with a form of warfare, so to speak, which led to huge losses among the Germans. There were only 600 men fighting with Morenga, and the German troops consisted of 60,000 people, mostly voluntary soldiers, however trained. And if you look at the reports of the German military, and if you read about the difficulties, I mean, it was inexplicable to the Germans. They said, okay, he must have read Clausewitz because he knows German and he knows also other languages. So this was quite a bizarre situation. It's quite interesting. He was rather unknown, or at least the Namibians I met did not know him well. And also when I did research in Namibia, people did not know him. So this was really a very important man who had a military concept and also a social concept. Well, Morenga is a novel which was really upsetting many people, and also it also had an impact on many people. Many people had to deal with it and had to face up to it. And you just mentioned it, Morenga isn't that widely known in Namibia, and you also wanted him to become part of the national memory again. And at a later stage, Morenga became part of the textbooks at school. Well, Morenga has also been translated into English. And my idea, and this is a complete utopia, is that there should be a Nama who there should be a Nama who, similar to the grandmother who had to work on a farm, and it's also part of literature that there are secrets, that not everything is being explained. But literature is much more. And it's something that science cannot do, which is describing emotions and describing or interpreting certain things. Well, in terms of the form, I was thinking about this complex story and how could I approach it. And there are three basic structures. And a narrative that is oriented on a veterinary who is undergoing a development which lets him doubt that he's doing the right thing. And he leaves the protection troops, the protective forces. And there's one there is someone who tells this story from the point of view of oxes.
Mal erzählt hat, ein Namibianer, der sehr gut Deutsch konnte, also wie.
So this is a story that was told by someone in Namibia to me. So he told such a fantastic story, and I thought, well, this is one possibility to dive into the history of this Toran country. So this is why these three stories were intertwined. Well, at the time and still today, your research was very important, and it was very important to put this research into a novel. And on the occasion of your 80th birthday, we have seen a new issuance of this book, and also other novels of you are very widely known in Germany. So, and DTV Publishing House has published it now again. And at the end, we will hear from you from Morenga, but right at the end of this event, I'm sorry, that's the way I am as a moderator. I'm a little strict about that. We thought that we might conclude this event with your reading. And now I would like to give the audience the opportunity to raise questions. You can do it in German or in English. We have interpreters.
Die Kollegin steht bereit mit dem Mikrofon und wenn
So the colleagues are already standing there with the microphone. We always need an icebreaker. I hope that there's someone. Oh, okay, there's someone. Or I could have asked a follow-up question, but I would like to give you the floor. So the young lady at the back was the first one. Well, first of all,
thank you for being here and getting the chance to really meet people and hearing that beautiful story. Und ich habe eigentlich
I've got a question in terms of the book title, and this might be a question to the editors, because I think you might both know the debate. Colonial past sounds as if this belongs to the past, and also post indicates that it's about something that is a long time ago and it's over. But if you consider post-colonial or if you consider colonialism as something that is over, and I think this combination in this title is quite interesting, that it actually refers to this debate. And I would like to know if this is, if you can contextualize it for us. And I mean, if one would only look at the title, one could even think of, or think into the wrong direction. Well, how about post-colonial relations of the past? Or how do we see post-colonial relations? And now the young lady in the first row.
You need to talk into a microphone so that the interpreters can hear you in the booth.
Absolutely inspiring and insightful. My question goes back into the beginning of this session, where I can't really remember who said this, but I think it might have been you. We have to stop thinking that what we are planning to do is only between nations. So you had this idea, and this inspires my question, because all of you are so active in so many fields. If you were allowed dreaming and no visa issues and no money issues, who would be the groups or the communities who you would wish to go back and forth or to collaborate together, that we get a little bit ahead in the movement that I think most people who are gathering here would like to reach?
And did you really mean nations or governments with your question?
What did you say?
Nations. Good. Just for me to understand. I have a small request for our technical guide. I hear the translations through the loudspeaker. Can you stop that? Because it's irritating when we try to listen. This is coming from here. Kannst du das abstellen, Philipp? Nein? Okay. Leiser machen? Auch nicht?
Well, we have to live with a loudspeaker, bringing back the interpretation on stage. Are there any other questions? There's a gentleman over there. We need a gender balance anyway, so we'd give the floor to a gentleman now.
For the question to Raquel, we have two very important words this evening been next to others. This is commemoration on the one side and nation building, as you talked about. And Kristin talked about commemoration is not only a symbol, it's a real place, it's a real group. And you talked about groups, not nations. On the other hand, you are fighting for nation building. We have very different narratives, I think, on commemoration, especially on this war. The Herero, I think, have a different narrative than the SWAPO government, for example. And I've been in May and have been in May in Namibia. And by accident, we talked more or less with Damara people. And they have their special view on the SWAPO, and why don't they talk about us only on the Herero, on the Nama? So are there strategies, ideas to bring these different narratives of commemoration together with the idea of a nation building of Namibia?
Thank you. Also, very important question. I collect one more. The hand was raised. Again, a young woman and on to my right. We're all young tonight.
Thank you so much for your insightful and very touching contribution. I was particularly touched by Mama Penne's experience that her écurie, her headgear, was taken away and burned. And I was wondering what role material culture, particularly museum collections, could play in forging new relationships and also maybe the return of objects from Germany to Namibia.
Ah, good. To answer. So the book title, maybe Henning or Kristin, because I assume that you were part of making that title, not only the Apsel and not only the Verlagshaus, but often they have a say, no? So tell us, what's behind the title?
In short, the title...
Well, the title is what you would expect it to be. And maybe that could be disappointing somehow. We are showing, in a way, that the past and the future are not in a relationship of mutual tension. They are not dual opposites. We see so many interfaces, as we've seen, so many different lines that cross the past and the future at different intersections. And at the moment, we just narrow down the discussion to certain perspectives and positions, especially in politics. We use very narrow concepts, like, for instance, the term of commemoration and remembrance. It's a term that we use. We do not question what it means anymore. And the title of our book has a question mark at the end in order to show that there are so many different moments where you can talk about the past, think about the past, and look into the future at the same time, the futures even. And you also emphasize in that title that what we are talking about is an open process. It's a playing field that is still very much open. I'd like to add a few things. Postcolonialism in Germany is being discussed vividly in Germany, as far as I can hear, being in Uppsala all the time. Well, of course, we wanted to be on the safe side, and we have put a question mark. When I hear about post-colonialism, I just think of what was said by Mahmoud Mangani, a social scientist from Uganda. He said, the only post-colonial thing that I know is the post office. Of course, we're talking about a post-colonial future in our title, but we have a question mark behind it. And when we talk about the current debate, we must say there is no such thing as the post-colonialism. It's an absolute fiction. It's something that is being built up in order to defend your own positions. And denigrate everyone who has a different opinion, saying that post-colonialism is anti-Semitic. I mean, I'm not going to mention a detail, but I'm very much concerned about the debate in Germany, and obviously you can see from the way I talk that I'm really angry about what's happening in Germany. My only consolation is that I think we have achieved at least something, because the white supremacists, the old white men, feel threatened. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so aggressive. It's wonderful to have them threatened. And seeing that and seeing things from that angle, it helps you to continue to be active and continue to be a voice in this debate. This also has something to do with the subtitle of your anthology, of your book. I mean, we have just participated in a very local debate here in Berlin about the future relationship. And this question about nation building, can I ask give this question to you, Raquel, because you're very passionate about nation building.
So on commemoration and nation building, with a question around if we could dream, who will negotiate with who? And as an avid dreamer, I want to put it across that it's very easy to identify who should negotiate with who on the German side, because as German citizens, you trust your federal government, that they represent you, and that the trust lines are very clear. On the Namibian side, however, because of this memory culture that we have embraced so far, the trust is a little bit not 100% there. And that's why even at the moment with the declaration, there are factions that believe that it's negotiated for them, but without them. So I want to believe that it's very important that if I were to be allowed to dream, I would really put it out there and say, look, you need to reconsider the declaration in its current form and start over again and make sure that the affected communities are very satisfied with who is sitting at the table. That is step one towards finding an amicable solution in the quest for reconciliation. Because as long as there is a big group that feels that what is on paper right now is for them from a bilateral perspective, but in terms of trusting the government that is representing them, they don't trust them. So I would say the Namibian government, the federal government, together with the affected communities in a manner that satisfies them. Because we are talking about people who can trace their lineage and say, my great-grandfather, great-grandmother. It's almost like you lost a family member that you could never bury. There is no closure, but now you are being given the terms of and conditions on how their burial should be organized. And it just feels traumatic. So that is just the dreamer in me speaking, saying that a lot has been accomplished, yes, to the point where an acknowledgement has been issued that what did take place in Namibia was indeed a genocide. However, the details around how to unpack the next steps needs to be as inclusive as possible. For as long as there are groups saying that we are not represented, our voices are not being heard, this issue will take longer than needed. Not necessarily to be laid to rest, but just to find clear steps in terms of reconciliation. So from a Namibia's perspective, the Namibian government will need to be very intentional with rethinking our memory culture as it looks like today. Because you cannot tell one version of Namibian history and elevate it above the rest. Because whether we like it or not, before we even come and say the liberation struggle, we got our independence because of the efforts that were put in because of the liberation struggle, we need to understand that before that there were people and there were events that happened to them. And these events, they are still living through these experiences of these events today. So we need to also look at our own commemoration efforts and ask ourselves, is this really what we think it will take to build a Namibian house? If we are saying we are a heterogenic nation of people, groups of nations, but then are we saying that glorifying the one history over the other is the way to build the nation, then we are very, very misinformed. So I submit that we have to relook what we're doing in terms of nation building at home, because at the moment it's really skewed. And it's out of that there's the current distrust going on with the affected communities, where they don't trust that the voice of the elected government is truly a representation of their interests.
Thank you, Raquel. I think it's very interesting and important to hear about that, because there's so many processes that got started, also younger people, artists dealing with, the remains, the statues and remembrance stones set up by the colonial powers and following, curated until today and so on. I mean, there's so much interaction about this, and we hardly know about it. So that again brings us back to, we have to meet to learn about it. What is actually happening in the process of commemoration in Namibia is also important for the relationship in the end. So I just wanted to relink it again to the relationship. And then there was this question. I think Kristin is best equipped maybe to answer, because you raised it. Should it stay between nations?
Das kann auch jemand. Ich dachte, ich mache die Frage mit materieller Erinnerung. Dann kann.
Gerne.
Ja, dann kann Naija oder.
Naija ist.
Nations.
Who wants to say something about the nations issue?
Okay, ist Ihre Frage mit Raquel?
Well, Raquel's question was just, Raquel just answered that question about who should have relations with whom.
Rather interested in the headpiece, because there was a question about that.
On objects in the headpiece. Henning, yes, why not? As we said, this is all about Verunsicherung in the process. So here you see us also.
Let me come back to that question in order to make one more important remark. This so-called reconciliation agreement is the result of bilateral negotiations between governments. It's called reconciliation agreement. And there's a question that arises: what level of reconciliation will be there, and who can reconcile with whom? On which level can one have reconciliation? Two governments of two states that say they represent society, well, have only a limited claim to representation. That's the absurdity of the United Nations, where the Charter says the we, the peoples, and then they just talked about governments and with governments, and nearly half of the countries in the United Nations has governments that do not represent the majority of their nations, their people at all. But let's say that both the German and Namibian governments can legitimately say to represent their population based on the political will. Then this agreement is an important step. It's a kind of mediation level, but reconciliation as such doesn't happen on the level of bilateral government negotiations. This, I think, was the essence of your question, and this is what we are also addressing in our volume, in our anthology. Reconciliation has something to do with humans, with people. It means you have to take this political declaration of intent and you have to transform it to a level where the people amongst each other get to talk to one another. And there is experience about that. There is the German-Polish schoolbook project, the German-French friendship. These relations were just developed because people were motivated and were given the opportunity to get in touch, to exchange, to see, meet one another, listen to one another, and talk to one another. In this so-called reconciliation agreement, out of the 1.1 billion euro, 50 million euro will be earmarked to be granted over a period of 30 years for a foundation that will facilitate an exchange between Namibia and Germany in the sphere of culture, science, and so on and so forth. The Humboldt Forum every year costs 68 million euro in terms of maintenance. Who could have had the idea that this agreement can be called a reconciliation agreement with such a meager number, adding to that the text saying this will settle all financial claims? This is really mocking the people.
Ja, danke.
Thank you very much. I think it's very good to have such a comparison. I mean, we tend to say we are not going to talk about the Humboldt Forum again. We are tired of it, but it's quite an appropriate comparison. Naita, you wanted to say something about this topic. What would a post-colonial future look like, or what do we need for a post-colonial future? I don't want to focus on reconciliation that much, but what do we need in terms of relations between humans? And while I was preparing for this event, or while I was in Namibia, I was a bit strange because many German counterparts said, well, we have special relations with Namibia, but what is so special about it? Well, we've already heard about it, that Germany and France had it, and Germany and Poland, and I see a similar situation between the German state. What happened after the 1990? How did the two German states come together? I mean, there were also families that have been torn apart, but in terms of Namibia, it would be very important to look at the people-to-people relations. It's very important that people come together, that at the level of the civil society we come together. The churches already started such a process, but this is not sufficient. The media is talking about it, but it's still a niche topic. So when there's a film shot on that, we tend to use the stereotypes once again, but we as the people have to come together. How do you see it? How did you experience it? How can we work together? You as Namibians? No, we as people, Germans and Namibians, because I'm always standing in the middle and I can look at both sides and I do feel at home on both sides. Well, we have been talking much about the reconciliation agreement, but there's also a cultural agreement between Germany and Namibia. And before your trip here, you took a closer look at it and realized that there's also an imbalance in this cultural agreement. So there's a lot Germany to Namibia, but only very little Namibia to Germany. There are many agreements between Germany and Namibia, and there's also this cultural agreement. And in this cultural agreement, Germany sends German teachers to Namibia. The German foundations get a director from Germany. The churches send an evangelical bishop there. All those people are coming from Germany. Also the German Stadtmission sending people there. And the German private school has a headmaster from Germany. I mean, we are no longer a German colony, but this cultural agreement, basically, I mean, is supporting an imbalance in the relationship. So the relations between Germany and Namibia were never cut off, not even after colonialism, not during apartheid, not during the liberation struggle. The relations just continued. And I took a closer look at it and asked, what can we find Namibian in Germany? But as Raquel has mentioned, it's also for us to do something. So what do we want to teach the Germans? And much is comes down to the civil society. We want an exchange between young people, between different organizations, with the media. And we would also cooperate with organizations that are not that widely respected, because we think that we also have to cooperate with them. I mean, we see what is happening during the war, during this war. Are we talking to this dictator or not? We have to come together as people. We have to bring people together. We have to hear from books like these. We have to read books like these, or also the books that are outside for you to buy. We also have to take a more in-depth look at people. What do they feel? What do they experience? And the German tourists, for example, they come to Namibia, and unfortunately they are put onto a bus and transported from one lodge to the other, and only shown the German, the places that look German. But Namibia has to offer so much more. We have to learn from each other. We have to get to know each other. We should not just travel to a place and check a box. Well, I've been there, okay. But there's so much more. There are stories of people. If we get to know each other, if we manage to get the genocide and the colonial past out of this niche, then we can only start to talk about reconciliation. Then it becomes alive. Then it's not only on paper, but it's filled with life. Yes, thank you. And this is what this evening was meant to be. We still have some time. And there was another question. Oh, okay. I forgot one of the questions.
Stimmt das? Sie wollten wissen, was diese Kopfbedeckung.
Unfortunately, the speaker is not using a microphone, and the interpreters cannot hear her.
And destroyed in the fire, and there are other pieces taken and they're here. What would it mean?
What a question! What a question!
Can you imagine that what was taken from your grandmother would come in another form, of course, in another object, back from Berlin Museum to Windhoek and then off to Kalkfeld and other places, and what would happen if it did?
If I have something that is symbolic in my tradition, it doesn't matter whether it is a shoe or whether it's a glasses or it is a hat or whatever it is important for me. But how can somebody else come and tell me that what belongs to me is not good enough for me, it must be removed? That is power. That is aggression. And that is what we are opposing. I'm refusing to explain why we have something that we need, why it should be questioned. I can't question a German why a German is having certain kind of shoes. This is his tradition. And I question nothing from German, what they want to have. Why should I be questioned? It's a question of power. Who is deciding what about other people? And I refuse to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I think it's a good answer not to answer the question in a way, but to say also that you need it, because I think it's overlooked that by many of us that it is needed for you to be in possession. Exactly. So we will not go deep into tradition and what it means, and this is part of the process. We will one day. We will sit and talk about really what it needs.
Jetzt gerade will ich nicht oberflächlich sein.
Yeah. There was.
Und Kerstin, It just shows, das zeigt einfach diese
And Cass, it shows that these processes need time. Of course, it's 100 years ago, but now that we develop a conscience for it, we have to take time, and it needs time. It cannot be done just in a few days. This is really a long process that we have to face up to. And we already said today that the reconciliation agreement was discussed in the Namibian parliament, but not yet in the German parliament. So the Linke, the left party, tried to put it on the agenda time and again, but the reason why many Germans do not know about this agreement or the process is that it has not been discussed in the German parliament. But where are we going to start with reconciliation when we do not support this? This is quite remarkable that it has been discussed in the Namibian parliament, and I think the government did not reckon with so much rejection. And here we can just assume why it happened. Reinhard, maybe you can tell more about it. I think the German official side would say because it's a declaration and not an agreement, right? So unfortunately, the speaker is not using a microphone and we cannot interpret him.
Oh ja, Entschuldigung, Mikrofon. Kannst du es nochmal ins Mikrofon sagen?
Okay, could you please use a microphone and repeat it? Well, on the German side, it has not been so relevant in terms of the budget, so that the German parliament needed to pass it. In Namibia, the resolution of the National Assembly 2006 is already out there. It's a long story, and I try to cut it short. But going back to this resolution, or based on that resolution, the government could not do anything else but have the parliament ratify this declaration. It has been debated in September last year, and until now, not much has happened. I mean, there might be reasons, and the other day I said to a friend of mine, well, there will be elections in Namibia next year, and we'll see how things turn out. Well, this is what we've not yet talked about. There will be elections next year. Of course, it will play a political role. And those of you who want to hear more about the debates in the Namibian parliament, there is an excerpt in your book, and 3 of the speeches, or 4 even, are part of your book. And there's one question from this gentleman over there. And I would say 1, 2, 3, and then we will try to conclude this event.
It's
not a question, it's rather a remark. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Kristin Platt for bringing up the idea of re-traumatization. And this brings us more closely to the human beings than the academic debates. So thank you for that. We are astonished that the agreement is the way it is, but it reflects our society, the society we live in. It's as simple as that. And the negotiator, Ruprecht Polenz, which is an honest man, surely, but he belongs to the conservatives. He belongs to a political family who, before 1990, had business dealings with South Africa. And in 1988, Franz Josef Strauss, the minister-president of Bavaria, was at the Linden Palace and met with his friends from Stalingrad. And so some of the thinking of that time has made it into this agreement. So I think we failed as German citizens. So I, myself, we, or also our parliamentarians, like Mr. Polenz, I mean, he said, well, I talked to these and that people in Namibia, and we should have asked, with whom did you speak, and what did you say, and what did they say, and how should we proceed? We failed to do that. Naila, we know each other. You've been a young girl when we met, and during the Kasinga attack, I was in Angola myself, and in the refugee camp of the UNHCR in Kursinga, I worked at the time. There was the war going on in Angola, and there were Hereros, Tamaras, and Ungunos from Angola were there. We worked there. We had a kindergarten for 600 people. We fought against the UNITA. We buried our dead people, and we lived reconciliation. And I do reject it, Naila. I'm sorry. When you talk about your time in the GDR, and of course this WAPO raised you to become an elite of the liberation struggle, and of course you trained with wooden Kalashnikovs, but you also had the others. You were people amongst us, with us. There was no distinction made. And I was there as parliamentarian when you were supposed to be deported to Namibia. My comrades and I fought against it, and also the educators in Berlin said it's insane to bring the children in Stassfurt right before the 10th grade back to Namibia. So let them stay here until they finish the 10th grade.
Parlamentarierausweis in Windhoek waren.
When I was in Windhoek, I heard someone say, now the Black Eastern Germans are coming. And the first GDR citizens who came to Namibia were surprised or astonished when they saw the FDJ shirts on these young women, the youth organization of the socialist system. Well, it's quite an interesting discussion, but we should have a separate event for that. Well, it was interesting at the time that these young people like Anita, who were not supposed to be taken into German private school in Namibia, you had to undergo a test, and 2 of the kids failed in the test, but all the others achieved the standards that were set by the German state. I think there are 2 more requests to speak, and I'm looking at the time, and I think we have to come to an end, and I would like to give the other 2 the chance to make a contribution as well. Thanks for your memories.
There are 2 persons on the left who want to take the floor.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. It was a very impressive discussion, and also the reading was valuable. We've just been beating about the bush, but let me ask very precisely, where do you see the role of the Foreign Office? Does the Foreign Office have a place in this process? What should be the role of the Foreign Office of Germany? And if you had a wish, what would be your wish? And if I may, a second question, where did mistakes happen, and where did we have misunderstandings on the way to that agreement? So there's a gentleman, last question, and then we hand over to our panelists. Thank you very much. It was a very moving discussion. I had the privilege of working at the Goethe Institute in Windhoek for a year. I was a volunteer there, and I worked with many pupils, students from amongst the Herero and Nama communities. And then when I came back to Germany, we had the chance to go to Mr. Holtz, a person who came from Namibia and is in Bundestag at the moment. And I understood that this trauma is still there, also amongst the young Ova Herero and Nama. You feel that trauma. So maybe it's a question of identity that is deeply present. all the questions at that time were just about financial compensation and when finally Germany would apologize for the genocide. At the same time, of course, we understand that the public isn't there in Germany. There's not much support for that process in Germany, and no wonder there's no discussion in German parliament about it. So my question to the Germans on the panel, what must we do to create more public awareness in order to create also more pressure on politicians regarding the question of financial compensation? And the question to the Namibians, what do you expect of German society, of Germany as a whole? How can we really financially give compensation for these atrocities? All right, 2 questions. Who would like to take the floor first to answer? We indeed had gone to the Foreign Office and we talked about a number of ideas. And maybe one of you would also contribute and talk about our process with and within the Foreign Office. What we expect of the Foreign Office, it's a very important question. First of all, a clear recognition, acknowledgement. The sentence in the agreement that the events that are called could be called genocide today. This is a statement that is not enough. It must be clearly called a genocide. And then we want more than symbolical support from the Foreign Office. They should talk to all groups, find partners in all the groups to talk to. And they should also address a few things we haven't addressed yet, like, for instance, the return of material objects of cultures that do not only have a symbolical importance. It's also a question of the positions, like, for instance, lawsuits against companies. There should also be legal processes. It's a very important topic. And the Foreign Office really should give support also to all these multifaceted processes. We also made a number of proposals to be discussed. And I think also the parliamentarians could make a meaningful contribution, like, for instance, insisting on a settlement regarding visa issues, enabling exchanges. If I may add, we didn't really talk about the agreement as such a lot. Henning has said it beautifully, and also our guests have emphasized that finally this process must become more open-minded. So we should listen more than just insisting on what we know is really the truth. So that was the question. What do you want next to the state support, the state governmental processes? Let me just give one example. I belong to a specific generation, a generation that is very emotional and was politically affected as well. And we remember how Willy Brandt went down on his knee in front of the war memorial in Warsaw. This gesture has changed the policy towards Eastern Europe. It was not about money. It was not about a treaty, an agreement. It was one single personal gesture. Since Namibia became independent, Chancellor Kohl was there. Federal President Herzog was there. Günther was there 2 years ago. Foreign Minister Fischer, who said no compensation relevant apology should be given. And that is still the typical feature of the agreement. He went to the airport of Windhoek to be there just 3 hours. He didn't even venture, he didn't even go to the city center. Now compare that to Willy Brandt's gesture, falling down on his knees in front of a memorial to the murdered Poles in the Second World War. That gesture alone and the gestures that German policymakers give to Namibia really are speaking loudly. Emotionally, German politicians have not understood a single bit. Brings us back to what Raquel said. Raquel has really said it. Emotional intelligence, that is something that we need. Because where did mistakes happen? Where didn't we understand? We didn't understand it's about people. It's about emotional intelligence. They were people, their land was taken away, their names, their religion was taken away, and Europe is just looking at Germany and say, Germans don't pay any money, otherwise they're going to start everywhere and we will have to negotiate all of our European countries. So instead of talking about the human dimension, I just heard a comment one where they said, well, I mean, we give money to the Jews and we have to give money to the Jews already. Now the Namibians want money too. It's about understanding. People don't live in their traditional land anymore. They have no access to their ancestors. The colonial system was a devastating economic system for us. After that, apartheid came. Apartheid even aggravated the situation. The things that happened in America with the Native Americans happened in Namibia as well. You could travel your own country only with a specific passport. So it's the emotional intelligence that we are missing in that discussion. And as I said, it's about emotional intelligence that we are really missing. Let me come back to GDR. When you were 14 in GDR, in 8th grade, you had to travel to Buchenwald, a former concentration camp, with your whole class. And I thought, oh my God, because everybody who came back from Buchenwald was shocked, was in a state of shock, and all of them said it must never happen again. So when you talked about Willy Brandt's visit in Poland, where he went on his knee, for the East Germans it was the visit to Buchenwald, where you saw all the skulls, the dead bodies, the teeth, the clothes that the people had been wearing before entering the gas chamber. That was a huge impression. And such things do not feature in our discussion. They're just talking about Germany, don't make a mistake, the rest of Europe will have to pay as well if you do pay now. I think that is a very good final word. It's really about human beings. It's about empathy. And it's about being genuinely interested in understanding. If you still have time and patience, you could listen to us for some more time. We didn't want to end abruptly. We want to listen to an excerpt from Morenga, the novel, in order to sort of virtually travel to Namibia and look back into the German-Namibian history. Uwe, you are going to read 2 passages of the book. We had been given a wonderful English translation, but we got it too late, and the interpreters are not going to interpret the reading ad hoc. You are going to listen to the German version, and your interpreters will say goodbye for tonight.
Die Kristin ein sehr schönes und gutes und treffendes Bild gebracht mit dem Rucksack. Und diese Vorstellung, dass durch Erinnerungsarbeit, das ist natürlich eine vorherrschende Vorstellung, dieser Rucksack immer leichter wird. Das stimmt natürlich nicht. Dieser Rucksack, der kann, wie sie schon sagte, auch schwerer werden. Und dazu gehört auch ganz wesentlich, dass eine Vorstellung, eine konkrete Vorstellung von dem erstmal vermittelt werden muss, auch hier in Deutschland, was Kolonialismus war. Und deshalb habe ich jetzt hier 2 Stellen rausgesucht und eine ganz kleine noch danach, damit Sie eine Vorstellung haben, dass das jetzt nicht nur Dokumentarliteratur ist, will ich Ihnen etwas vorlesen. Das sind Dokumente aus dem Briefwechsel über die Prügelstrafe. Und nirgendwo wird das so deutlich, was es bedeutet, eine instrumentelle Vernunft anzuwenden, die ausgerichtet ist nach ökonomischen Gesichtspunkten und die zugleich dehumanisiert in einer Weise, die man sich nicht vorstellen kann heute, aber es ist die Normalität gewesen in den Kolonien. Und ich lese Ihnen das vor, jetzt die Diskussion, also Wort für Wort, Komma, alles stimmt genau. Also das ist überschrieben in dem Roman, ein kurzes Kapitel von der milderen, menschlicheren und doch pädagogisch nachhaltigeren Wirkung des Tau-Endes. Das ist ein Zitat. Aus dem Aktenbestand des Gouvernements von Deutsch-Südwestafrika, Seite 694, der kaiserliche Bezirksamtmann Windhoek, den 16. Januar 1908, betreff Prügelstrafen. Dem kaiserlichen Gouvernement berichte ich gehorsamst, dass seit 1. Oktober vorigen Jahres keine Prügelstrafen von mehr als 10 Hieben verhängt worden sind. Eine weitere Einschränkung der Prügelstrafe halte ich im gegenwärtigen Moment nicht für angängig. Die Prügelstrafe ist die einzige Strafe, die der Eingeborene als solche empfindet. Sie entspricht seinem seinem Auffassungsvermögen und seinen Sitten. Sie allein wirkt abschreckend auf ihn. Gefängnis, selbst Kettenhaft, sind für den Eingeborenen kaum eine Strafe. Im Gegenteil, vielfach musste leider die Beobachtung gemacht werden, dass Leute, die zu Gefängnis verurteilt wurden, sich darüber freuten. Geldstrafen verfehlen ebenfalls die Wirkung. Der Eingeborene kennt und schätzt den Wert des Geldes noch nicht, so sauer er es oft verdienen muss, so leichtsinnig wirft es wieder weg. Es dürfte sich nach den hier gemachten Erfahrungen empfehlen, eine weitere Einschränkung der Prügelstrafe, als sie die Verfügung des Herrn Staatssekretärs vom 12. Juli 1907 erstrebt, zurzeit noch nicht in Erwägung zu ziehen. An das kaiserliche Gouvernement in Windhoek, Station Atacampe, den 9. August 1906. Ich bitte gehorsamst in Erwägung ziehen zu wollen, also Sie müssen auch auf die Sprache achten, das ist natürlich die Sprache des Unmenschen. Ob es nicht angebracht erscheint, bei der Kolonialabteilung des Auswärtigen Amtes dahin vorstellig zu werden, die Nilpferdpeitsche als Züchtigungsmittel wieder durch unser altes Tauende zu ersetzen. Wenn ich auch als Freund der Prügelstrafe mir wohl bewusst bin, dass ja gerade eine kräftige Züchtigung als abschreckende Strafe erwünscht erscheint, so bin ich in den 4 Monaten, in denen nunmehr hier mit der Flusspferdpeitsche gezüchtigt wird, doch zu der Überzeugung gekommen, dass diese Art der Züchtigung eine Grausamkeit darstellt, die wohl nicht beabsichtigt worden ist. Es ist unvermeidlich, dass von den Hieben der Flusspferdpeitsche Löcher in die Haut gerissen werden und gerade an der Stelle, die dem Menschen und besonders dem Auge des Verletzten am schwersten zugänglich ist. Eine Wundpflege ist daher für den Geprügelten selber recht schwer. Die Wunden sind schwer reinzuhalten. Der Verletzte bedarf des Gesäßes zum Sitzen, die Wunde wird schmutzig, eitert und der Gezüchtigte bleibt wochenlang arbeitsunfähig. Ich glaube nicht, dass das die Absicht der Kolonialabteilung gewesen ist, als sie die Nilpferdpeitsche einführte. Wie so anders die Züchtigung mit dem Tauende. Der Missetäter fürchtet sie sicher ebenso wie die mit dem Kiboko. Aber die Folgen sind bei Weitem nicht so schwer. Sie sind milder, menschlicher und doch von pädagogisch nachhaltiger Wirkung. Der Schmerz brennt, heftig, heiß, juckend, aber die Haut wird nur selten verletzt und die früher einmal zur Ausgangspunkt von allerhand Klagen gemachten Epidermisverluste treten kaum auf. Das Tauende erscheint mir das Ideal eines Züchtigungsmittels für Disziplinarvergehen, für Entlaufen oder Drücken vor der Arbeit, Beharren im Ungehorsam, gröbliche Verletzungen des Pflichtverhältnisses und dergleichen. Die Züchtigung mit der Dickhäuterpeitsche erscheint mir für solche Vergehen als zu schwer. Man hebe sie sich gern für nur schwere Verbrechen auf und so verliert die Prügelstrafe an Wert. Sie büßt ihre Eigenschaft als Disziplinarmittel ein, gezeichnet von Döring. Das ist eine Diskussion, die da von Amt zu Amt gemacht wurde und die vermittelt eine konkrete Situation für diejenigen, die dort misshandelt wurden, ausgebeutet wurden, umgebracht wurden. Ich meine, wenn man so Kolonialismus allgemein sagt man ja, es ist schlimm, aber man muss ihn sozusagen sichtbar machen im Konkreten. Die Hauptfigur in diesem Roman ist sagte ich schon, ein Veterinär der Schutztruppe, der sich freiwillig dahin gemeldet hat, der aber am Schluss nach seinen Erfahrungen, die er gemacht hat, die Konsequenz zieht, den Dienst zu quittieren. Das ist immerhin sehr viel. Überlaufen ist sehr schwierig, kann man sich vorstellen, in der Situation. Aber es hat doch auch Menschen gegeben, die desertiert sind. Und da kommt auch einer in dem Roman vor, den Namen wollen wir nicht vergessen, Wenstrup. Das ist ein Unterveterinär gewesen, der desertiert ist, der das nicht mitgemacht hat. Also Gottschalk ist nicht so weit, aber er ist ein Beobachter, er ist wenn man so will, ein passiver Held, durch den das hindurch, dieses Geschehen durchgeht. Und ich lese zum Abschied, der führt Tagebuch die ganze Zeit über, fiktiv, aber genau recherchiert. Tagebucheintragung Gottschalks vom 25.09.05. Wie kommt es zur Tötung? Wie können Menschen andere erschießen oder erhängen? Und wie können andere zusehen wie auf einem Jahrmarkt? Was erzeugt diese Teilnahmslosigkeit? Und darunter dieser fürchterliche Hass. Vielleicht ist etwas in ihnen, was ihnen selbst hassenswert ist, ein Teil ungelebten Lebens. Was tötet das ab? Das Mitfühlen. Gut, Dankeschön.
Vielen Dank auch, Uwe, für Einblicke in deine Erzählung. Ich danke euch allen hier auf der Bühne. Ich danke Ihnen fürs geduldige Zuhören. Ich glaube, die Gespräche sollen weitergehen. Wir haben versucht, eben die Lähmung, die im Politischen so eklatant geworden ist, ein bisschen aufzubrechen mit diesem wunderbaren Besuch von euch hier bei uns und dieser Runde. Wir werden es morgen noch fortführen. Ich danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit, wünsche Ihnen allen einen schönen Abend. Wir laden noch ein zu, wenigstens Softdrinks und Brezeln unten auf der unteren Etage. Da können wir noch ein bisschen weiter miteinander über einiges sprechen und ansonsten wünsche ich Ihnen einen angenehmen Abend. Vielen Dank fürs Kommen.